So with that, we're going to move into our program for today. So the title of today's program is called Soliciting Major Gifts with Excellence. And our speaker is Graham Hoffman, who is the president and CEO of the Jewish Federation and Jewish Community Foundation of Southern Arizona. He's worked in the philanthropic sector for over 17 years and has demonstrated experience in strategic planning, major gifts fundraising, endowments, and planned giving. The Jewish Community Foundation aids the Tucson community in securing legacy commitments, managing endowments on behalf of local agencies, stewarding donor-advised funds on behalf of local philanthropists, and offering grants to local organizations looking to advance offerings to the Tucson community. Prior to his transition to Tucson in 2018, Graham was Deputy Director of Development at AIPAC and Deputy Director of AIEF, where he oversaw major gifts, endowment, and grants processes, developed activist engagement and stewardship strategies, and empowered regional development staff to secure new and increased commitments to advance the organization's strategic growth plan. A graduate of Washington University in St. Louis's Olin Business School, he began a successful career in consulting at Accenture, specializing in organizational change management, operations improvement, and strategy. Prior to AIPAC, Graham spent a decade at Hillel International in senior strategy roles, ultimately as Associate Vice President for Strategy. Graham was responsible for pioneering and advancing Hillel's engagement and education strategies. So we're really excited to have Graham and all his experience here today to talk about soliciting major gifts with excellence. So with that, I will turn this over to Graham.
Thank you, Julie. I have some slides to share, but I've been disabled from sharing. Is somebody the host who might be able to configure that?
Okay, you should be able to now.
Great. Let's just make sure that that works. All right, can somebody, are you guys seeing the presenter view or the slides?
Presenter.
Okay, hold on, I can fix that. All right, how about now?
Perfect.
See the slides, great, okay. Thanks, Ori, for your help. So it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. I will confess from the beginning that I'm going to try to cover an hour's worth of material in about 50 minutes, and that may leave a little bit wanting, but this will not be the only opportunity that we'll have to go through some of this content in the community. And so if you're looking for more, I encourage you to be in touch with my colleagues Ori or Brenda or Molly or Andrew, who are on the call today, or with me directly, and we'd be happy to find another opportunity to do more and more depth. We're thrilled to be a resource in the community and very excited to bring this to not just this group of fundraising professionals, but also to agencies in the community looking to enhance their major gifts fundraising solicitation. So let me begin with the fundamentals of solicitation for major gifts. And I want to start with fundraising and sales ethics. So for those who have been in the fundraising field for a long time, you may have at various points in your career been compared to a salesperson. And that is because at the heart of major gifts or solicitation in general is sales. And it's, I think, valuable and helpful for us to actually think about and understand our work in the context of sales. Not because we want to be those smarmy used cars people who, you know, nobody likes to be under a high pressure sale from, but actually quite the opposite. Because sales can be done in an ethical, meaningful, and thoughtful way that leave both parties feeling great about the exchange. And that's what major gifts solicitation is about. So let's think about the headspace that we need to be in. First of all, to begin with, you have to be sold on what you're selling. If you're not sold on an idea, you cannot sell it to others. And this relates very much to the question of ethics. If you are out there in the world promoting an organization that you don't believe in, that's unethical, and you will not feel great about it, and you will not be a great salesperson for it. In most cases, that's not how we feel about the places that we work. We're mission-driven, we're passionate about the cause, and therefore, it is a privilege to be able to solicit investments for a cause that you are passionate about. And having that mindset, thinking about the work that you do, and helping others in emerging into our field to think about the work that we do, not as smarmy sales work, but actually as a unique privilege, is really a valuable part of the orientation to this work. And the most important is this last point. As a solicitor, we are actually doing a potential donor a favor, a service, by alerting them to an important philanthropic opportunity. No apology or hesitation is necessary. These these concepts are important in terms of the mindset that you take to this work, because your mindset actually affects the way that you show up and how you engage with the people that you work with. And for many, and we do this kind of same training with volunteers all the time, because we have a lot of volunteers in this community who help to solicit gifts. They come at it from this place of, oh my gosh, I don't want to call all of my friends and tell them that I want to stick my hand in their wallet and pull money out of it. And we help to orient them around the fact that that's not really what this work is. This work is about matching people who have a desire to do something meaningful with the resources that they have at their disposal with an opportunity to make a difference in the world. And when you think about your work in that way and approach it that way with the people that you solicit, it's a transformative shift in perspective and really can make a big difference in how those interactions take place. One solicitor can make a difference in changing the destiny of the organization and thereby the world. You want to go into a solicitation with an expectation that you may be rejected, because then you won't be disappointed. You don't need to be disappointed or frustrated. Not every solicitation results in a major gift of what you're expecting. If you go in understanding that it's possible you'll be rejected, you don't have to come out of it feeling terrible if it doesn't turn out the way that you hope. On the other hand, many times, or in most cases, it actually will turn out very positively. And so if you manage your expectations going in, you don't have to experience disappointment coming out. And finally, solicitors solicit. Let it become a way of life. If it is just a part of how you operate in the world, a natural extension of who you are, just like when you meet someone who's an amazing salesperson, they don't have to be selling you on the product that they work with. They could sell you on anything. They could sell you on the cable company that they like to work with, or the car that they just bought that they think is really amazing. People who are good at expressing themselves, at sharing ideas, at conveying the importance of opportunities and offerings, are able to do that across all elements of their lives. And the way that you become good at that, if you don't feel like you're good at that now, is through practice. And that's one other critical piece to understand. And this is the piece that I think people in the fundraising field have misunderstood for a long time. There is the belief that there's this magic formula and this special expertise that fundraisers have that other people don't have. That's not actually true. It's not a special, unique skill that nobody else can figure out how to do. It just takes practice, and a good amount of practice, just like anything else. So you've all seen the books, I won't quote them for you, around how many hours it takes to become, the next Tiger Woods in your field. It requires hours and hours and hours of doing the work to get really excellent at it. And the best way to accomplish that is by practicing. Now, how do you do that? Most effectively, in my view, by doing solicitation role plays. And we'll talk more about that as the presentation goes on. Finding the right donors and prospects is an important part of making an effective sale or an effective solicitation. So you want to understand that the best donors to target have both desire and capacity. And donors who have given anywhere previously are the best donors to your project, because at the end of the day, people who give, and people who don't give generally don't give. If you approach someone with a philanthropic orientation, they are much more likely to give to your cause, even if they've never given to it before, than someone who doesn't have a philanthropic orientation in their lives. And so you can help yourself by identifying those people who have a past experience in giving. Where do you find those people? Well, when we're not in COVID times at other people's events, because somebody else is organizing an event of all the people who give to their organization, and by virtue of being there, you're meeting all of those people. Where else do you find them? On the walls of every building of a nonprofit in this community, in the annual reports that people send out, at the fundraising gala for the big new university building that's being unveiled. So you can find a number of different places, and it's harder during COVID when we're not all coming together. But one way to think about it is people who have donor-advised funds. So an organization like us or CFSA publishes a list on a regular basis of fund holders at our foundation. Those are people who give. That's why they set up a philanthropic fund. We talked about a solicitor being able to make a difference in changing the destiny of an organization. One donor can do that too. And by sharing that possibility with donors, you can help bring them to the table in a different way so that they understand the significant impact and importance that they can have. And donors want to feel comfortable that their investment will be managed wisely, carefully, and well. That is one of the most important things that your organization can convey to all of your supporters. How is it that donations that you receive are managed, investments are managed wisely, carefully, and well? And how do you think about the donations that you're receiving as investments and not just as a gift for you to do whatever you want with, but really as a thoughtful desire that a donor has to make an impact in the world? So there's some key behaviors of successful fundraisers. Having confidence is important. That's why it's important that you believe in your cause. When you believe in your cause, the confidence will come naturally. Rapport building, you can never do enough rapport building. And we'll talk about this more. But when you're in a solicitation, you need to focus all of your effort on rapport building. Even when you have a relationship with the donor from before, you want to hear about what's been going on in their lives, where they've been, what they've been up to, because all of that is not only deepening your relationship with that donor, but it's providing you with valuable context clues about the kinds of things that are meaningful and important to them. And how do you know when rapport building in a solicitation is over? When the donor tells you that it's over. How will they do that? They'll say something like, hey, Ori, I imagine that you didn't come here to spend the whole day hearing about my most recent trip with my family. Why don't we talk about the organization that you're here representing, because I know you wanted to have a conversation about that. And even sometimes when a donor does that too early in your meeting with them, you want to try to push back into the rapport building to make sure that you get more time. Paint a picture instead of making a statement. You can do that by telling stories as one example, but make a visual in your donors' minds about what it is that you're trying to talk about. Ask lots of questions as a way to actually make your point. So one of the things that donors appreciate more than anything else is learning or hearing something that they didn't know before. How do you figure out the things that they don't already know? By asking questions and gathering from them whether they have an answer. So if your organization's work is about literacy in the community, ask a donor a question about how many people don't know how to read and how important it is to have those skills for every other aspect of life. And all of a sudden, the donor will recognize that there is a great gap of need out there in the community that they didn't realize before already existed. Always be making the case. You want to use your advocacy and your storytelling as a way of making the case for the great work that you're doing. Create a strong sense of urgency. The time is now. The pandemic helps us to do that because the time is now more than ever before. And redirect everything back to your organization's philosophy and strategy. So when you get questions or objections, you want to redirect those back to the philosophy and strategy and approach that your organization takes to achieve success. In terms of other key behaviors, because it is still all about sales, you want to understand what motivates them. And so think for yourself, what motivates you to buy? Or in the case of giving, what motivates you to give? A conversation is much more effective as opposed to being pitched or lectured. That's one of the reasons why asking questions is one of the best ways to convey and make key points. The best way to handle the toughest questions that they ask is to recognize that objections are actually a gift. Why is an objection a gift? Because a donor is basically telling you, if you can overcome this obstacle or this hurdle, I am inclined to give you money. So what you then have to do is see that gift as an opportunity to redirect the donor back to the philosophy and strategy of your organization and to help them understand how you overcome that objection in the way that accomplishes your work and your mission. And when you do that, the donor will be inclined to make that more possible and be a part of your team in supporting those efforts. Be an active listener and recognize that part of being a solicitor is being a detective. You're gathering all the little clues that they're putting down, all those breadcrumbs that they're leaving for you, and you're following that trail to a place of what is meaningful and impactful for them, and how do you use that as a part of the conversation that you're having with them to make the most compelling case possible. So we're going to talk about simplifying solicitation with 10 easy steps. And we're not going to spend quite as much time on the early steps in this as the later ones, because you'll see they're relatively straightforward. But we are going to talk through each of the steps and the significance that they represent. So the 10 steps to successful solicitation are as follows. Number 1, identify a potential prospect. Like we talked about earlier, where do you find prospects? Those are the people who have given to other places before. You may have those prospects within your own database because they've given to you before, but they haven't given to you in recent years, or their giving has reduced, or they haven't given as much as they could, but you need to identify potential prospects. And there are a variety of other ways to do so. You can buy and acquire lists. You can do wealth assessment of people from within your database or email list. You can even go out there in the community and meet people at other people's events. Again, typically not during COVID times. Number 2, you want to rate and research your prospect. One of the best ways to do that is by understanding the giving that they've done in other parts of the community. So it is very helpful to see, for example, at the University of Arizona, when they publish a list of people who have given how much to various parts of their campaign, or other organizations around town that publish annual reports that include donor giving levels. That helps you to understand what their capacity is. If they're able to give a $10,000 gift to another agency in town, that suggests that they're probably able to give a $1,000 to $5,000 gift to you. Most donors don't give everything that they are capable of to a single organization. They give to a number of different causes. And so looking at what they're giving to other places helps you understand what they can give to you. Another great thing to do is to meet with them at their home or in their office. Again, not right now. Today, most of the meetings are going to take place on Zoom or over the phone. But when you can return to someone's home or office, being in that space gives you a great deal of clues about their capacity. If their wall is full of photos of every annual vacation trip that they take, from Hawaii to their safari in Africa to the week that they spent in Australia and New Zealand, you have a pretty good sense that they have a certain capacity. So having those context clues from being within someone's space not only makes them more comfortable to host and be in the space that they're comfortable with, but also gives you a lot of helpful information. You want to make an appointment. You make that appointment, you want the donor to understand that you're meeting with them to talk about getting involved in your work. You can be as straightforward as saying, I want to meet with you to talk about the possibility of investing in our work and the importance that we're doing. Or you can be a little bit more mercurial and say, I want to talk to you about getting involved with us. Either way, donors understand what that means. And you don't want it to be a surprise to anyone that you're meeting with them to sit down and ask them for money. So you want them to understand that you want to make an appointment to come and speak to them. When you meet with them, you want to begin by asking open-ended questions. And we're going to sort of zoom in on 3 parts. So you're going to focus on asking open-ended questions as a part of beginning the rapport-building conversation. So what are open-ended questions? Those are the kind of questions that put the opportunity on the donor to do the majority of the talking. As a general rule in a solicitation, you want them to do 80% of the talking and you to do 20% of the talking. And that's a really important dynamic to understand, because many people go into a solicitation thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna tell them all about all the important things that we're doing and all the great stories of success that we've had and all the needs that we have and why things are so compelling, and that's, you know, gonna be the majority of the conversation. The most successful solicitations will involve the donor doing the majority of the talking. And the best way for you to set that up is by asking questions that will lead them to tell you more than just a few-word answer. So a closed question is something like, you know, what's the last place that you went on vacation? And then they say, oh, Barbados. Okay, well, but an open-ended question will be something like, you know, tell me about a time when, or, you know, how have you been doing in the context of everything that's going on in the world right now? And the donor will then have the opportunity to share lots of information with you. And you can probe and ask them for more information without even needing another question by saying things like, oh, can you say more about that? Or that's so fascinating. I'd love to hear more about where your thinking is around that. And those, again, create opportunities for the donor to share with you in an open-ended way more about themselves. Why is it helpful to get the donor to talk about themselves? Because you're asking them about a topic upon which they have the most expertise of anyone, and certainly the most expertise of anyone in the room. And everyone loves to be an expert, and people love to be interesting and to have someone be interested in them. One of the techniques that we teach as a part of this exercise is that in order to build quality relationships, it's important to be interested and not interesting. Often people think what makes other people attracted to us or want to relate to us is that we become this magnanimous, interesting personality that others want to relate to in the room. But the reality is the opposite. By being really interested in other people, that is what attracts them to us and what opens them to a relationship with us. That rapport building then continues, as I said before, until the donor is the one who tells you that they're finished with that. And they'll do that in one of a couple of ways. They might say, oh, you know, I just want to make sure that you know that I have a hard stop at 9 o'clock this morning. So if there's more that you want to make sure we get into the conversation, now would be a good time to do that. If you've scheduled an hour with a donor, you want to make sure that rapport building does not last less than at least 20 minutes. And I would suggest that you think about it taking as much as 40 minutes, because as we get into the remaining steps, they're actually a lot quicker than you might imagine. So once you've shifted from rapport building, you're going to move into making the case. Making the case is about having a key set of talking points, a pitch, and some stories about your organization and what its significance is. That means that you have to have your key talking points anticipated, practiced, and worked out in advance. You're going to tailor those points based on the rapport building conversation that you had with the donor. So as a part of rapport building, you want to understand what are other things that they're involved in the community? What are some of the most meaningful things that they've done philanthropically in recent years? And when you learn those things, you can then create connections between what they care about and what's meaningful and important to your organization. So you want to have your set of how you tell your story. And that story can be told in a variety of different ways. One valuable approach is to include the actual story of an individual or a couple of individuals who have been impacted by the work of your organization. Doing that gives them firsthand example and allows you to paint a picture of the kind of work that you do that they can visualize in their minds, in addition to understanding at a rational level what the strategy and philosophy of your organization is, which is an important part of how you explain the work that you do. You're going to prepare for some common objections. So in advance of going into a solicitation, you want to think to yourself, what are the things that donors could or might or typically tell us when we come and solicit them? Sometimes donors will say, it seems like you have lots of money. Why do you need mine? Or it seems like what you're trying to do is something that 3 other organizations in our community do. Why are you the ones that we should be supporting? Or there's other needs that feel more immediate in the community right now. I'm worried about people having enough to eat and a place to sleep. Why should I be caring about literacy when that's something that we can worry about when the pandemic is over? So you want to be prepared for those objections to come. And how are you going to respond to those objections? So with the literacy example that I just gave, well, if we don't cultivate pre-literacy and literacy in young people today, the cost of correcting those gaps later will be as much as 7 times as much as the intervention that we can do right now. So while making sure that people are fed and clothed and housed is important, it is also important to make sure that we are not cultivating a cohort of young people who are going to struggle for the remainder of their education and their lives by virtue of having been set back by this pandemic. We need your support now to ensure that we can continue to intervene and accomplish those objectives. Now, where does that come from? That comes from anticipating what the objections are that they're going to raise in advance and being prepared to rise to that occasion when they do. You also want to take advantage of the opportunity to address objections by asking questions. So I just made a very compelling case for why we should be investing in literacy now, but I could have done it a very different way. I could have said, do you have any idea, Ori, if you're the donor, do you have any idea how much it will cost our community to correct for a lack of interventions in pre-literacy and literacy that we can be having right now? And then pause and let the donor think about it. Well, in fact, the data says that it's 7 times as expensive to intervene later in life than it is right now when we can make that difference. All of a sudden, the donor's mind is blown. They think to themselves, wow, if I can save us 7 times the expense 5 years from now by intervening now, that seems like a really worthwhile investment. Step number 7, you are going to ask for the gift. Asking for the gift requires you to not be apologetic, not be hyper, state an amount, and ask the donor to consider a gift or an investment of that specific amount. And after you say that number, you are going to be silent. It's important that I emphasize that because that silence is actually a really valuable tool for you. Many fundraisers get into the habit of undermining their ask by continuing to speak afterwards in a way that suggests to the donor that the amount that they asked for doesn't feel comfortable or appropriate to them. I will tell you, I did a solicitation with one of our volunteers who has been most effective in this community in raising money. In fact, this woman raised a 6-figure gift for the Gregory School just a couple of weeks ago. And I was with her at a solicitation, and we were asking a donor to go from giving a very meaningful gift of about $30,000 a year to almost more than doubling that gift to $75,000 a year. And this volunteer wanted to be the one to make the actual ask, and she put out the number, you know, I'd like you to consider a gift of $75,000. And then she continued to go on for another many sentences where she, in essence, sort of flubbed and undermined the significance of what that $75,000 gift would have meant. And if she had just stopped at, I'd like you to consider a gift of $75,000 and been silent, it would have afforded the donor the opportunity to consider that request and to meaningfully reply. Any donor who's going to sit with you through this process and not say to you, hey, listen, I appreciate you telling me that great story about that kid that you helped a few years ago, but this isn't really a cause that I'm interested in, they're going to be inclined to want to say yes to an ask that you're going to make of them. They may not say yes to exactly the amount that you put out there, but you need to give them the opportunity to hear it, to think about it, to reflect upon it, and to respond to it. So when you make that ask, you need to then be silent. And many fundraisers either under ask or they're not willing to put forward an amount. They just feel uncomfortable about saying that number that's so large to them. You need to remember a couple of things. First of all, what $75,000 represents to that donor that I met with is a very different thing than what $75,000 represents to me. So it's not about my orientation to $75,000. It's about how they feel about $75,000. And if I have researched and rated them appropriately, and I'm asking them for that amount, it's because I know that they gave $150,000 to another cause that they care passionately about, and that $75,000 on top of that is still within the realm of what they're capable of and what's possible for them. And when I ask them for that, I want to do so confidently, I want to do so calmly and thoughtfully, and then I want to wait and give them the opportunity to respond. You don't ever want to argue. No one is obligated to give us anything. Instead, you want to convince them by asking questions. So I'll give you an example. One of the common things that a donor will say after you make an ask and you put out the amount is, I have to talk to my spouse about that because we do all of our giving together. In most cases, what that donor really means is, I'm not convinced yet, and I want more time. I don't want to make the decision while I'm here in the room. I want more time to make the decision. The best thing that you can do at that point is to ask them a follow-up question. Well, Mr. Donor, if your spouse was here in the room with us right now, what are the questions that they would ask so that I can help you be equipped to answer those questions when you sit down together and come forward with the answer that we both want, which is that you'll say yes. And the donor will then say, well, you know, one of the things my spouse is going to ask is, you know, are there other people that are giving at this level, or are we the only people that you've asked to give this amount? Because we like to be among other families, and we want to make sure that we're not the only people who are giving such a significant gift to this organization. Donors will price an organization. They will look at your organization and they'll say, you know what, people to this organization give $10,000 a year. I don't want to give $100,000 a year to an organization that everybody else gives $10,000 to. I want there to be more people who will give $10,000. But if there are a lot of people who give $100,000 and I'm capable of giving $100,000, then I think about that in a different way psychologically. So by asking the donor, what are the questions that your spouse will ask? What you're really understanding from them is, what are the obstacles that are still in the way of saying yes to me today? And when you meaningfully answer that question and you say, actually, I'm thrilled to share with you that there are 35 other families in our community who have all stepped up and agreed to give at this level, and you will be the 36th. And let me tell you why that's such an important, significant thing to us. We have a goal this year of getting to 40 families at this giving level, and over the past 3 weeks, we've secured 6 gifts, and with yours, it will be the 7th. And what these increase in donations are going to enable us to do is X, Y, and Z, and that's what's so significant. And then you turn back to the donor and you say, now, I know you said before that you want to talk to your spouse about this, but it really seems to me like this is up your alley. And I suspect that if you go back and confirm that with your spouse, that you two will be really excited about joining us at this giving level, and we'd love to celebrate that with you. And typically what the donor will then do is either say, you know what, I'm pretty sure my spouse is going to agree, and I'll confirm that with them and get back to you. Or they'll say, yeah, I'm really excited to have that conversation, and if we have other questions, we'll follow up. And normally I will push again and say, well, are there any other questions that I can help you answer now in anticipation, so that all of the objections are cleared out of the way? And if what's needed at that point is just for them to go home and have that conversation, then great. But I will tell you, in my experience, 2 out of 3 times, the donor will actually commit in the room, in the conversation, even though they previously told me that they needed to talk to their spouse in advance. When you clear the objection out of the way, they're inclined to say yes, and they do. You want to be 3 steps ahead of where they are in the conversation, anticipating ahead what are the objections that they might come up with, what are the directions that the conversation might turn, so that you can be prepared and equipped and ready to navigate that. And you want to always keep forefront in your mind, what is your goal? If your goal is just to renew their gift, that's a very different thing than if you want them to go up meaningfully. If you just want to renew their gift, you may not need their spouse's permission, and you may be able to push to say, we need you to renew now more than ever, because we need to know that we have the support that you've provided us in the past to help us get through this difficult and challenging time. If you want them to go up meaningfully, then you need to understand how that fits into the context of the other priorities and the other asks that people are making of them. And you can gather that information in part through the rapport building work that you do during the session. So I'm just going to go back for a second and say, okay, then steps 8, 9, and 10 are to respond to concerns, negotiate, and then close and thank. So let's talk about responding to concerns for a moment. You want to understand what the obstacles are that stand in their way of saying yes. And you can gather that information by asking questions and having them lay that out for you. If you're not in a position to respond to all of those concerns in the conversation, then you want to say to them, you know what, that's a really great question that you've asked. I don't have that data in front of me right now, but it would be my pleasure to gather that and get back to you. Do you think that stands in the way of our continuing this conversation? And the donor will tell you, or they might say to you, yeah, I'm interested in that information, but I'm okay with continuing the conversation. If a donor comes forward and offers you an amount that's less than what you asked for or different than what you expected, then you want to negotiate with them. You want to say to that donor, I understand that right now you don't feel like the increase to $75,000 that we've suggested is something that you're comfortable with. Would you consider going up to $65,000 instead? Because that would be really meaningful to us, and also, is more in the comfort zone that you referenced earlier. And again, when you make that second ask, you then also want to be silent afterwards, and you want to give them the opportunity to thoughtfully consider what you've said and respond. And don't undermine the ask. Number 10, you want to close and thank. So you always thank them, regardless of the outcome of the conversation, for their time, for their listening, for their willingness to engage with you, for sharing so openly about themselves, and for the gift or for considering the gift. And of course, you always need to follow up afterwards, of course, if need be. And there's a variety of different ways that you follow up, including thanking them in writing, acknowledging their pledge or commitment so that it's clear to everyone what was agreed to, and potentially plugging them into or providing additional information that they requested during the conversation that you had to go back and gather and share with them afterwards. And the most important thing is that after you have thanked them, then you need to leave. Now, this is really easy on Zoom because everybody clicks leave meeting and all of a sudden you disapparate and appear somewhere else. But when you're in a room with someone or you're having lunch with them, you need to be very thoughtful about the fact that once they agree to the gift, you want to be in a position to leave. Why is that the case? Because it is normal psychological human behavior to experience buyer's remorse. And after you have made your sale, you do not want them to go back on their commitment before you leave the room and say, oh, you know what? I didn't think about this other commitment that I made to this other organization. I'm actually thinking that the best number for me is going to be 50,000 instead of 65. You made the sale, you got them to commit, then you want to leave so that they have the opportunity to sit with that. You have the opportunity to send a follow-up thank you and acknowledgement of the pledge or commitment. And when they experience the buyer's remorse, you're not still in the room for them to try to renegotiate. So I want to summarize a couple of keys to these successful solicitations. Number one, listen. Listening is much, much more important than what you're going to present. Number two, ask open-ended questions. The more that you put the burden on them to be doing the talking and storytelling and sharing, the more comfortable they will be, the more information you will gather, and the more effective the solicitation will go. Number three, be prepared. You want to know as much as you can about them and be prepared to tell the story effectively of your organization and its impact and to respond to their questions and concerns. Ask for the gift for a specific number that you have either anticipated in advance or thoughtfully arrived at through your rapport building discussions in the room. Give a specific number and then be silent. Never argue. and always thank. Now, I want to address a couple of other key things very quickly that I think are related to this discussion. First of all, and then we'll have time for question and answer and conversation. First of all, many organizations raise money primarily through events as opposed to face-to-face donor solicitations. And I want to make the case to all of you that this is a very inefficient approach. And if you can help your organization to understand that face-to-face major gift solicitations will be far more effective and successful, you can transform the future of your organization's fundraising. And that is for a variety of reasons. Number one, when a donor gives a $200 ticket price to get into a room, they think that they have done their philanthropic job. You ask them to pay that ticket and show up, and they did it. They were there, or they bought the ticket and didn't come, but either way. What they're not thinking about is the fact that it probably cost you $80 just to provide their dinner that night, not to mention all the other costs of producing that event. And what most organizations most significantly underestimate is how much staff time you devoted to the planning of that event. So if your fundraising staff didn't spend 6 months planning your annual gala at a total cost of $100,000 in staff time across the organization, imagine how many more solicitations you could have had face-to-face every day with donors and gotten major gifts that have no other cost other than you picking up a cup of coffee or a lunch or joining them on a Zoom or a phone call. So please, if you can help your organizations understand, events have a real and valuable purpose. They are about helping your donors connect to the impact, the recipients, the significance of your work, and helping them feel good about and be stewarded in the context of your work. But if you set out to do events from that perspective, and if you devote the appropriate amount of staff time and resources to them accordingly, and if you ask donors to pay for the cost of their participation and make clear to them that it's not actually a charitable donation, it's a couvert for their dinner or their experience that they're participating in, then donors can be set up for the fact that you're going to solicit them in the room or afterwards or beforehand, and that the event itself is not actually the fundraiser. And I know that there are many of you out there that will say, well, don't worry, we raise all of our money through an ad book. And I will tell you that every year we all struggle with those and see that those numbers are not growing dramatically and that it's harder and harder to make that case. Because at the end of the day, it is much easier to convince a donor to invest in your work because they care about and are passionate about the impact that you can accomplish in the world than to get a bunch of people to do a one-time gift because somebody's being honored at your event that won't turn into a long-term investment in your organization. And that is the piece that I want to say that is the most important. If you can cultivate a group of donors and investors who will continue on a year in and year out basis to support you at the same level, it is a much more valuable, worthwhile investment of your staff time, energy, and effort to have those donors support your organization than a one-time donor who buys a ticket to an event or buys an ad in an ad book and likely won't renew afterwards. So if you can, prioritize your efforts on building deep and substantial relationships with donors who have the capacity to write $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, $50,000 checks or more, and steward them and cultivate them and work with them every year so that they understand that this is not a one-time investment. It's about supporting this critical work all the time, and that you count on them every year to make sure that you're able to achieve the kind of impact that you are in the community. I want to just apologize for having gone so quickly through so much content and let you know that we have a follow-up worksheet that we will send out or that Ori will put in the chat that helps you think about how to address some of these questions during pandemic times in particular. And I now want to open it up for questions and discussion. I think people might be muted by the host.
I know we had some questions in the chat. Amy, I don't know, do you want to ask them yourself or do you want me to read them for you? Oh, she's muted.
Sorry, I was muting.
Oh, go ahead. You go for it, Amy.
So Graham, thank you so much. I think we all need this little pep talk right now. Even those of us who are already thinking this, it's been a challenging year. So I had a few questions to you. The first one, can you talk more about the best way to get meetings, either with current donors or new donors? And my second question was, when you are sitting with donors and asking them about themselves, do you feel that it's appropriate to throw in some questions that might be a little more advocacy based? If you don't know the person, I usually try to wait to see what they tell me, but that kind of tie your organization to a larger cause, and thoughts on that.
Great questions. So in terms of how to get the meetings, I think you want to either offer something to the donor that you think will be valuable to them, or ask for something meaningful from the donor that they will be excited to give. And so the offer that you can make is, I'm really excited about the opportunity to update you about some of the latest developments in our work in the midst of everything that's going on in the world right now. Or, we've just completed a strategic planning process, and I'm really excited to sit down with you and share some of the areas that we're going to be focused on going forward. Or you want to ask them for something, which is typically going to be advice. Hey, we have a really big challenge that we're trying to face right now, and you have been so generous with your time in the past and willing to share your perspectives, and I'd like to meet with you to pick your brain on a couple of things, which is a really hard thing for someone to say no to. Now, when you're making that ask, you also want to say, and I want to talk to you about renewing your commitment for our organization this year, or, and I want to talk to you about ways that you might get more involved with us this year. Because you always want to be transparent and upfront about the fact that during the conversation, a solicitation is going to take place. You do not want that to be a surprise to the donor. It's not fair to you, and it's not fair to them. And as much as you may have a fear that they're going to see that and say, oh, whoa, 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 I don't want to have a conversation, or just not respond, I will tell you that 98% of the time in my experience, if you lead with an offer or a request of something that's meaningful to them, they will respond very kindly and be very excited. And with some donors, especially those who have been with you year in and year out, you just come out and say, hey, Amy, I want to meet with you and talk about your annual commitment. And they'll be thrilled to say yes, because they know that that's what happens. And every year they want someone to meet with them and talk about their annual commitment. Or in many organizations, you might not have been meeting with them every year. They've just been giving. And you want to say, like, I'm so grateful for everything that you've done for our organization. I want to share with you some of the impact that we've had because of your gifts. And I want to talk to you about the ways that you can continue to be involved with us going forward so we can maximize the impact that we're having in the community. In terms of the question asking from an advocacy perspective, of course, you want to feel them out in the context of the rapport building and discussion that you have beforehand, but question asking is the best way to make a point in a solicitation, or frankly, often even in a debate. So from an advocacy perspective, one of the best ways to come across and make your point is to show them a gap in their knowledge or in the system that they believe is existing to accomplish the things that they care about. So for example, you know, can you imagine how many people have been affected by food insecurity in the context of the pandemic since it's begun, and how much more significant of an issue that is than it was before? Or have you considered the difference that an additional $30 a month in SNAP might make if the government were to decide that they could increase that benefits, and the impact that that would have on the work of our food bank? And all of a sudden, what you're doing is advocating and question asking at the same time. And they aren't going to typically know the answer to that question, which is going to create interest in them. And then they're going to be that much more inclined to listen to the pitch that you're going to make, which is going to in part answer that question. Sometimes people use questions as a way of imbuing a sense of fear. So, which is not a bad thing in fundraising if you use it thoughtfully, right? So how many children do you think in Tucson are going to go to bed hungry tonight during this pandemic, or are going to go to bed hungry over the course of this coming month during the pandemic? How many families do you think are going to struggle to put food on the table? Well, all of a sudden, I'm way more inclined to want to not just know about the problem, but what I can do to make a difference in it, because it's unconscionable to me that a child is going to go to bed hungry when I know that I have food sitting in my pantry that's not being eaten. So I feel an obligation to do something about that and make a difference in the world. So that's what I would say about questions related to advocacy.
Graham, oh,
yeah.
Sevi had a question.
Sure. Not sure if, go ahead,
Hi.
Sebi.
Hi, thank you. I was glad that I was at home for this so I could type all these notes. I would not have been able to get as much down in person for sure. I have a question. Do you send a thank you? You said if needed on the thank you. Do you send a thank you if you have a meeting and there's no donation given, say to somebody who hasn't given before?
Yes, I will always thank them for their time. And again, there's different philosophies about, like, does that need to be a handwritten thank you note, or can it be typed? Or could it be an email or a text message? You want to sort of think about how that person communicates and what's going to feel to them like an extra special touch. So if they're the kind of person who would normally text, but you send a thoughtful email, and that will feel like an extra special touch, your goal is just to exceed their expectations in terms of what you deliver. And part of that thank you can also be about re-engaging in a next step if no gift was given. So you can say, you know, thank you, I'm so grateful for the time that we spent today, and I'm looking forward to the next time we can sit down and I can bring you this additional information that you asked for so we can talk about your commitment. And that's a great opportunity then for you to tee up the next step, whatever that next step is. Or I'm really excited for you to come volunteer with us in a few weeks so that you can see the impact of the work firsthand, and would love for you to then consider what kind of a donation you might make. Or I know you're an end of the year donor and you like to consider your donations in December. I'll look forward to following up with you the first week of December so we can talk about this again.
Okay, and a follow-up question I had to that is, how many times would you meet with somebody and sort of come up blank?
How many times before you ask them, you mean?
No, if you meet with somebody to ask and they say no, and you send a thank you and maybe they somehow you get them to meet again, how many times would you make that effort with someone before you feel like they're wasting your time?
I see. Honestly, I've rarely had people say outright no.
Okay.
I've had people say, I'll give you a very small amount. I've had people say, I'll consider it and come back to you. Very rarely does somebody just flat out say, like, no. But if they do, you want to understand what the source of that no is. Sometimes it's they had a terrible experience and you want to work over time to overcome that experience so that they'll reconsider it again. So you want to understand what the source of that no is, and that helps you to decide how much more to go meet with them. I would say if you can get them to have a second meeting with you, that's a good sign. Like if they're not inclined to spend time with you, they're going to say no and take me off your list. And if they do that, then you can still send them a thank you and say, just want to let you know I've taken you off our list, and you know, regret that things didn't work out differently. But you will typically know from someone if they're willing to spend more time with you, they're at least inclined to hear you out another time.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah. Deb Dale just added into the chat something really important that I want to emphasize. When a donor says no, what they are often saying is not now or not yet. And not yet means I'm not fully convinced yet. I'm not ready. And so part of what that tells you is that the pitch and conversation that you had might not have met them where they were. Part of what that may tell you is that they just need more time to process and think about it. But I think Deb makes a really important point. If you're thoughtfully prospecting and you're meeting with people who give to other places, and then the not yet could be a not yet because I'm supporting a bunch of other things right now, and I'll consider you again in 6 months when I'm in a position to do so. And the goal that you then have is to sustain that ongoing contact with them in some touch-oriented way so that they're inclined to remember you and be open to a follow-up conversation at another point. There's been some questions about having the PowerPoint presentation. We are happy to send out a PDF of that I will say it's one of those things when you go back and look at it, that you'll look at it and be like, oh, wait, it's not as meaningful just with those bullets. Like, you need the stories that go along and the examples that were given. So there's a recording being taken of this session. And if you want to go back and watch that later, I imagine that's something that you can follow up with the folks at AFP on, and you'll be able to go back and just watch that one segment with that one piece that you might not have gotten down in your notes. And that may be more valuable than just the PowerPoint by itself. But in the chat, you'll see the tips for fundraising during the pandemic or during crises. And that's certainly something also to take a look at and keep in mind. I want to be respectful of everyone's time and know that we have reached the 9 o'clock hour. I have until about 9:15, so if anyone wants to stick around and ask any follow-up questions, please feel free. But otherwise, I want to turn it back to our hosts in case there's any messages they have before we depart.
Thank you so much, Graham, for all that information. That was just a treasure trove of info. So yes, feel free to follow up with us if you'd like to have the recording or the slides. I'm not sure if we're going to send out automatically, but certainly by request. A few of us are also willing to stay for a few more minutes, so feel free to stick around and we'll continue some of this conversation. But otherwise, just reminders to check out National Philanthropy Day and engage in that however you can. The Locally Grown campaign, which is our sponsorship fundraising campaign, sponsorship support. Our scholarship round is now open, so you can find that information on our website. Community-centric fundraising meeting is happening on Friday, October 30th. Also, this is AFP's Ethics Month. So if you go here, I'll put this, there's a bunch of information on AFP Global about Ethics Month that you can check out. Next week is also AFP Lead, which is the annual leadership conference that happens every year. Of course, that's virtual this year, but that is going on and you can still register for that. So I've put those links into the chat. So thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for participating in these programs throughout 2020. Like I said, this is our last monthly program for this year. Next month is NPD, and then December we're taking a month off so everyone can focus on their families and their fundraising. And then we'll resume our monthly programs in January. So look for information on that coming soon. So with that, thanks so much, everyone. Do stick around if you want to chat a little bit more, but anyone who needs to jump off, enjoy your weekend and the cooler weather.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you to everyone, and to Grant in particular. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra.
Thanks, Sandra.
Yeah, I've got to jump off too. Otherwise, I would stay on. But thank you, Graham, and great to see all these familiar faces.
Thanks, RC. Good to see you.
Bye. Bye.
That was so cute.
That was amazing.
What a cute little voice.
No, I love seeing the babies.
I know. Yeah, the babies and the animals that make their cameos.
Deb, don't we have to go to another meeting?
Me?
Yes. Yes,
Oh,
we do.
The Alliance?
Yeah.
I think I had to get off all my political and lobbying boards when I joined a media company.
Oh.
I guess that's how that works. When you want to be impartial media, that's our goal.
Ellie, thanks for sending that information about the Trump administration's executive order against diversity and inclusion training. So there'll be an article coming out in the newsletter about what nonprofits can do to fight that executive order.
Mind-blowing.
It's an executive order that was issued demanding that any type of training that is diversity and inclusion related that any government agency is partaking in needs to stop. So it's a pretty dangerous executive order.
And that's coming out before November 3rd, I hope. Just checking.
Yeah, in fact, maybe I can find and put in the link for that here.
Do we know if that includes organizations that take government funding, or is it just government organizations?
I seem to imply that it was coming.
Yeah, my guess would be this is step one.
Which I just don't.
I don't think they have the authority to do that by executive order.
Yeah.
I think you can only mandate it for actual government organizations.
Yeah, there was a lot of legality questions around it. As are, you know, a lot of things right now, a lot of legality questions.
Well, they did tie government funding to organizations that provide abortion education or abortion. So I don't know, but maybe that wasn't federal. Maybe that was judicial or, you know, through the legislative, not the executive branch.
Well, does anybody have any other questions for Graham? Because I know how busy you are, Graham, and I hate to take your time.
Well, I'm happy to drop off if you guys have another conversation to have. So.
I don't want to. Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to thank you again. You know, when I started in my current role, I'm at Habitat for Humanity Tucson. We had donors who'd been giving for years, but nobody had sat down with them. And so my other thing that I'm noticing, of course, is that those we have had time to sit down with in the last few years, it's much easier to go back to them now. And the ones that we haven't had time to sit down with in the last few years, now is, of course, much more difficult. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that, you know.
Well, I would say two things. I was in a breakout earlier this morning with an agency that was talking about the fact that their donors are quite elderly and that not all of them are Zoom equipped. And that tells me two things. One, if you have a donor who's been giving to you for many years and they're elderly and you haven't been having a legacy conversation with them, you are making a very big mistake and taking a very big risk, because the likelihood that subsequent generations of donors will be similarly inclined and capable and philanthropic and devoted to your cause as opposed to others is a risk. And what you need to be doing now is recognizing, acknowledging, and appreciating those donors who have been giving to you for many years, and leveraging that as an opportunity to engage them in a conversation around the fact that they likely want to make sure that your work will continue for generations to come, and they likely are afraid that their children and grandchildren won't have the same commitment that they do to accomplishing the same things. And so you can basically make the case to them that in the same way that in their estate plan they care for those people that are their family, that they can care for their extended family at Habitat by virtue of making you a part of that plan. And they can have charitable benefits associated with that, which are actually quite substantial. And there's a few ways to think about that, but one that I think answers your question in addition is you should make an offering, or could consider making an offering to them to celebrate the fact that they've been giving to you for, you know, X number of years. So say that you have a founder of Habitat in Southern Arizona whose name is, I don't know, Ridgefield. You could create a Ridgefield Society that acknowledges everyone who's been giving to your organization for 10 years or more uninterrupted, or 20, or whatever the right number is for your donor base. And you could have a commemorative pin made that you can send them as a special acknowledgement of that, and invite them to be recognized in a newsletter that you put out of all your Ridgefield Society donors. And that's a great way to ingratiate yourself and to reinforce with them that this thing that they've been doing for all this time, they want to keep doing. And if they really want to keep doing it, then the way to do that is not just through an annual contribution, but also through a legacy or testamentary commitment.
I love that idea because it does not require them to already have made the commitment to you. So that, you know, I think that's how it's always been presented to me before in the past is, oh, once they make the commitment to plan giving, then we'll recognize them. You have donors. I have donors who've been giving 25, 30 years, you know, So that's a great idea. I really love that.
Well, and I would suggest having two societies. You have a legacy circle, which are the people who have made the commitment, because you want to recognize and acknowledge that step as well. And then you have a different society that's for donors who have given for X number of years or more. And that gives you the ability to prospect all those donors who have given to you for X number of years or more for legacy as well, because they self-identify by saying, yeah, I want to be recognized in this way. That's a pretty good signal to you that they're going to keep giving. And by reinforcing it, by giving them that pin, which they then feel a sense of like obligation around, oh, I've been honored with this pin that I can proudly wear at our annual event or whatever. Now I feel like I'm not only going to keep giving, but I'm much more inclined to be open to a legacy conversation.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And, you know, Brenda and I have talked about before, and Ori also, like, I grew up in the Jewish community where there's a certain status, you know, associated with giving and being involved. And at Habitat, I have never met so many donors who are like, oh, you don't need to come visit me. We'll continue to give. Oh, you don't need to recognize me. And I'm like, no, I really do. I really do. There's a very like, we're giving because that's what we do, and we don't really want or need any extra attention. So that was very interesting to me when I started, but I think they secretly do want the attention. So.
Well, Amanda had a question. Amanda, did you have a question?
Oh, they keep changing and coming. Everything everybody's saying is just like opening my mind. A couple of things. I'm just thinking about like doing legacy society stuff. Like I received something from the Sierra Club that was like a little certificate that fit in an envelope that I thought was kind of brilliant. Even though I know what they're doing. But we have kind of a gap in our database. Like I would hate to insult anybody. I could tell a lot of people that like, thank you for giving for the last 20 years, but I know there's a whole chunk of people who may have been giving for 33 years. And sometimes they bring that up when they make annual contributions.
So one thing that, I mean, the nice thing about creating a society is that it costs you almost nothing. You know, what's the pin going to cost you? $1, maybe, probably less. Yeah. So you can offer people the opportunity to opt in. Like you can send out a newsletter to all your people and say, we're so excited to launch this new society. We're recognizing and acknowledging anyone who's given to the organization for 20 years or more. Please complete this form online or send back from the newsletter and tell us, and we'll send you this beautiful commemorative pin, and we'll be so excited to invite you to an upcoming event that we'll gather all these folks together to meet with each other. And at the end of the day, if somebody identifies themselves as that and they're not, it's still a great prospecting tool for you because they're saying, I want to be a part of this, in which case you should be pursuing them anyway. So yeah, there's no downside really, you know? It's not going to diminish it for the people who've really been giving 36 years or whatever if one family or 5 get identified with a pin too who didn't actually do it, because they won't really know.
That's really great. And also like for us, like I can see them telling the story and then getting those to be testimonials. Like, do you remember your first gift, or why have you been giving for more than 20 years?
Absolutely. And those testimonials are really valuable and can help lead to the conversation about testamentary legacy commitment, because once they've told you in their own words why it's been so important to them to start giving that long ago or to give for this many years, that's exactly the rationale for why they should want to care for your organization in perpetuity.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Well, I'm going to jump off. This has been really fantastic, and I have enjoyed spending this time with all of you. Ori and Brenda, of course, are happy to be helpful, as am I. So feel free to reach out to us, and thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure to be be
Thank you so
much.
much.
Graham. You're the best.
Yeah, really good.
We're super fans.
Thank you all. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
All right, everybody. Bye. I'm going to end the call. See you soon.
See you all.